We've all seen the headlines in the news of how somebody lost their life in an act of cold-blooded murder, and it grabs your attention, but have you ever stopped to think about the life of the person at the center of the news story? These victims were way more than a salacious headline. I'm Eric Carter-Londine, and my podcast, The Murder in My Family, dives into some of those stories to help listeners get to know the person who was lost, and how their death affected those closest to them. Listen to The Murder in My Family everywhere you listen to podcasts.
Visit Avery.com, AVARY, for the most up-to-date news and information on Team Avery.
Avery, 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 Avery,
This is the Gala Show. I'm your reporter on the beat, Gala Avery. On this episode, you may know my guest as a writer-director whose work span both theater and film. He's the filmmaker behind the indie drama Some Freaks, and now his screenplay Woman of the Hour, directed by and starring Anna Kendrick, is just about to hit streaming on Netflix. Today on the Gala Show, I've got filmmaker Ian McDonald on the mic. Hey, Ian.
Hey.
How you doing?
Good.
So before we bring up the topic for today, I have a question for you. Before we started talking on the mic, you kind of told me a little bit about your upbringing and that you're not from a film family. I wanted to ask you, though, what really got you interested in filmmaking?
I grew up in a family where everyone was very passionate about movies, but I didn't know anyone in the industry. I didn't know anyone who did anything creative. My dad went to college to be a painter, though, and
so he was creative in that way.
Yeah, he loved art, but he had a family at a young age, and so my parents owned a child care center when I was a kid, and then my dad became like a property manager. But honestly, it was around the time I was like, I don't know, 12 or 13 or something like that. My dad just showed me a bunch of his favorite movies in quick succession. He had been, kind of bugging my mom for years about like, okay, is he old enough for me to show him this? Is he old enough? And she was the more cautious of the two. And so there was one year where he just kind of took the leap and he showed me One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And my mom was in the other room and she suddenly heard the TV playing. And
her spidey senses went off.
Yeah, because it's a great movie, but that opening scene has some really harsh language in it. And she came in and she's just like, I think he's too young. And my dad's just like, it won 9 Oscars. Like, what are you talking about? Like, he's got,
I love that. It won 9 Oscars.
Yeah. He's just like, it's art. He needs to be able to see it. And basically the whole thing ended with my mom saying like, all right, fine, you keep an eye on what he watches from now on. And my dad's just like, great. And I was like, great, because now I can see anything. And so it was like sometime after that, he showed me like, The Godfather and John Carpenter's The Thing and The Howling and like all these other wonderful movies that he, Alien was one of his favorite movies. But even better, it's like, he at that point worked down the street from like the cool video store in our town.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What was the video store in your town?
It was called the Video Port in Portland, Maine. And R.I.P. It's not there anymore, but I loved it so much.
I always love hearing the people's like personal stories about their video stores.
Yeah.
It's just so special.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'll ask you about that in a second.
It just like you always know the cool ones because they'll have like an incredibly strange movie section, you know, and that's where they put all the like early Peter Jackson and John Waters and and basically from that point on I would just like every Friday I'd say like, all right, Dad, here's the list. And I'd give him a list of like 4 movies and he would like stop by the video store and he would pick them up and he'd give them to me. And then that was my weekend,
yeah.
That was kind of my film education, was just kind of ransacking that video store and like, especially their incredibly strange movie section. and you know, making little zombie movies in my backyard. You know, like you know, both my parents were really supportive. They, you know, my mom would make these huge meals for all my friends and feed them while we were, you know, running around in zombie makeup. And you know, I would put the zombie makeup on, and then she would take it off. It was
a team effort.
It was a team effort. Yeah. It became an extra team effort when I made one of my friends look all gnarly, only to discover he had a latex allergy.
Oh my God.
And my mom's just like, for the love of God, we have to get this off his skin. And I'm just like, well, he's already in it. So like, let's shoot the scene quickly. And he's just like, Ian, my face is burning. So yeah, no, oh Lord, to be 17 and making movies in your backyard. But no, it was, yeah, so they were always super important. And it was kind of around that time that I discovered, like, you know, George Romero and Sam Raimi, and they were really meaningful to me because they were people who had film careers but weren't based in Los Angeles or New York, you know, so sort of seeing like regional filmmaking scenes, I think was really inspiring to me, where it's just like, oh, you can live in Pittsburgh and still make good movies.
Now, as always, my guest gets to bring their topic to the mic. So, Ian, what's your topic and why did you decide to choose it?
True crime films, because my new movie, Woman of the Hour, is a true crime film, and it's a genre that I have a lot of love for and a lot of, you know, complicated feelings about. And yeah, I just wanted to explore it. Before we bring up the topic, it's time for our commercial break.
Back by popular demand, the Video Archives merch store is up and running. Get your favorite t-shirts, hats, notebooks, stickers, and more at videoarchivesmerch.com. You know me. I write all my notes in the Notes on Cinema notebook, the Gala edition, of course. Check out videoarchivesmerch.com to get yours today. Hey, thanks so much for being a loyal listener. If you want to keep up with me off mic, make sure to follow me on Instagram at Gala Avery.
And we're back.
You heard it here. We are going to be talking all about true crime films. I have 30 minutes on the clock and our time starts now. Okay, one thing I want to ask you before we dive into the movies that you've I know you have like a list of movies that you kind of want to bring up, but what was it specifically about Rodney Alcala that drew you to his story?
Yeah.
'Cause there's so many interesting killers out there.
Yeah, so it's funny, in true crime circles, he's sometimes compared to like Ted Bundy, you know?
When my mom and I were watching it, she was like, oh, was he this serial killer? And I was like, no, that was this other guy. And oh, he wasn't the BTK guy. Like, he's Rodney Alcala.
Yeah, so, and when people compare him to Ted Bundy, what I think they actually mean is like, you know, he was kind of handsome and he was well educated. But he was interesting to me for exactly the opposite. Like in some ways, I think he's the exact opposite of Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was like a chameleon. You know, he was, you know, physically he could make himself look very different. But also he was good at convincing people that he was like a choir boy and that he was this like, you know, nice all-American kid. Rodney Alcala was interesting to me because of he kind of flaunted his crimes and his bad behaviors and his bad attitudes. And so in some ways, Rodney is less the thing that is interesting to me, because I think in some ways serial killers themselves as people aren't that interesting, you know? They're puddles that we assume must be oceans because their behavior is so
different
dark.
than ours, yeah.
Yeah, and because their minds are in some ways they feel a little like, you know, black boxes where we're just like, what's going on in there? But what's going on in there is usually pretty simple. You know, it's just like making other people feel really bad makes them feel good, and that's kind of it, and they pursue it. And And so that's not complicated. How they become that way is complicated. You know, like I remember reading this Malcolm Gladwell book where he talks about how plane crashes happen. And he's just like, in any given plane crash, there's like 16 causes or something like that. You know, the pilot's working a double shift. The pilot and co-pilot have never worked together. They're running late. There's a small equipment malfunction, you know, and it's the accumulation of all these events that causes planes to crash. And I think that's kind of the case with serial killers. But one key ingredient is like the culture in which they thrive. You know, how does it enable them? And that was the thing more than anything else that I found really interesting,
About
you know,
Rodney,
because again, he wasn't a chameleon. He didn't, you know, like there are those killers where people are like, no, him? Really? And with Rodney, everyone's just like, yeah, that kind of checks
Rodney,
out.
Yeah, okay. So what's the first movie on your list?
The first movie on my list is Monster, the Charlize Theron one from 2003.
Wow, and she had a really crazy transformation for that. Like when you look at her as an actress in that movie, you're like, is that really Charlize?
Yeah, no, it's an amazing performance. In some ways, the performance I think has eclipsed the movie itself. But yeah, the movie itself is it's very sad. It's very beautiful. Like the opening 25 minutes is really just a love story between her and Christina Ricci's character.
Yeah.
And it's a really beautiful love story where you have these two people who they're both kind of outsiders and they meet each other, you know, essentially in a bar one night.
There was a little squirrel that just ran by.
I know. Oh boy, we have feeders, so we don't discourage them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and and it's just really beautiful. It's you know, about these two very sad, lonely people who find each other. And what makes it interesting to me is there are some people who, you know, you look at someone like Rodney, and he was going to do awful things at some point in his life. Like it's kind of baked into him. And with her, I don't think that's the case. I think the world kind of beat her down.
Yeah.
And it you know, some monsters are born, others are created.
And I think in that case, it's definitely created. I mean, like when you know, like the true facts about that and just like the abuse that she went through and just everything, it's just terrible. And it really, like, after a while, it's like when someone has been mistreated so poorly, they will lash out. And as you said, like there are monsters that are created and there are monsters that are born.
Yeah.
And it's a really interesting differentiation between that.
Yeah. And again, there's just so many moments in the movie that I find really, you know, kind of, for some reason, one of the things that I find really interesting is when she first meets Christina Ricci's character in the gay bar at the beginning of the movie, she bristles. She's just like, I am not gay. Don't talk to me. You know, don't touch me. Don't talk to me.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's interesting because she has her guard, you know, at the beginning of the movie, she's homophobic.
Yeah.
She just is. And so it's, in addition to, you know, it's a movie of self-discovery in a way that's really beautiful, but also in a way that's really dark. You know, she finds she has this capacity to hurt people. You know, in a weird way, I almost think of it as being a little similar to something like Ms. 45, you know, where it's like you watch it and it's just like, oh, there's this initial moment where it's just like, oh, you've been traumatized and you're lashing out, and the lashing out feels empowering on some level, where it's just like you're hurting the people who have hurt you, but who have hurt others. And then but then the movie keeps going and you realize like, oh no, now you're hurting people who don't really pose you any threat. And it's because the damage is deeper than what it first appeared to be. I don't know. At least that was kind of my reading of it.
It's interesting though, because I know there's another sapphic story on your list, which is Heavenly Creatures. And so it's interesting because like when we're looking at this list of these true crime movies, it's like the women perpetrators, they tend to kind of like, they're killing men, but they love it. It's just a really,
Except in Heavenly Creatures,
in
they
Heavenly
don't.
Creatures, they actually they don't. You're right.
It's killing one of their mothers, and it's really
Oh
interesting.
God, that scene with the rock and like they're on the
Yeah,
hiking trail, right?
They're on a hiking trail. One of them puts like a brick in her purse and carries it along. And well, let's just jump into it. Heavenly Creatures is, it's another one of my favorites. I think it's the best thing Peter Jackson's made by like a wide margin. And again, it's really sad. It's really beautiful. There's just so many great moments in it. But one of the things that I find so interesting is like the fact that they picked the mom as because it's just like there are 4 parents here. The mom isn't the only one making these decisions, and so the mom is a little bit of a scapegoat for all their problems. It's Melanie Linsky's mom in it, and the fact that they choose their victim in this way, it's interesting because it's a coming of age movie where you feel the feelings of these young people. Yeah. And yet at the same time, it's clearly made by adults. It's, Peter Jackson, and I feel like she's always overlooked, but Fran Walsh, his wife and co-writer on the script, and so we, the audience, have the perspective to know these are kids. Yeah. And these kids have, their feelings run deep, but in some ways they've misdiagnosed what's
going on.
What's going on in their lives. Like, who's the actual bad guy?
Well, I think it's also fascinating. As you said, there are 4 parents, and the 2 girls in the story come from very different backgrounds and very different lives. And when you see how because one thing I like about the movie itself is the dialogue with the parents, because how the parents speak to the children is how children feel like parents speak to them. Yep. And so like when the mom is like yelling at them, or like the dad at one point, doesn't he like stop the boy from coming into her room, like one of the boarders? And like as a girl, like maybe you're really upset about that, but like as an adult, you're like, yeah, that guy better get out of her room. Yeah. And like the dad is actually doing a really good thing right there. And a lot of these things that these parents are doing in this movie are actually kind of like, I'm going to use air quotes, good parenting. Yeah. But seen through the lens of a teenage girl, you're like, oh God, like my parents, like I'm full of rage and like all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Because like, the guy that comes into Melanie Linsky's room, he's like, it's weird because he's like, he is alternately depicted so the depiction of him in the movie is kind of torn. On one hand, he's like this kind of like goofy guy who's a boarder in the house, and he's kind of awkward and he seems sort of sweet, but the way in which he like kind of sneaks into her bed is really sleazy and kind of creepy.
And also she's a young girl. She's not supposed to be doing these kinds of things. Her dad is defending her from like a creep. Yeah, exactly. And so it's just like, and then the guy becomes obsessed with her and he's like riding his bike down the street and he's like waving at her while she's in a bus. And it's the sort of thing that like sorry.
Do you remember the scene?
Yeah, it's just also the depiction of it. It's like he's obsessed with her and he's riding down the street waving at her at the bus. It's like, it's weird. Yeah.
It's a sort of like movie moment that we see a lot in film, and so you go like, oh, that in a certain context it could almost seem romantic, but if someone did that in real life, that's crazy. Like that's very weird behavior. And so and so the parents are actually really sympathetic. Like and what's interesting too is you watch the parents wrestle with, what do we do? Like there are actually moments where they're just like, hey, let's let them be together for a while, because at a certain point we're going to have to separate them, and we want them to have this moment together. We're not trying to be cruel about it.
Yeah, and it feels cruel though when you're a child, because you don't understand like everything that's going on. And also the moment where they actually like kill the mom is so, like, in my opinion, was visceral. Oh yeah, like, because also they're just like on a hike all together. Like you think you're having like a nice family day, like you're taking both the girls out, and like all of a sudden it's like you got the brick in the.
Well, and from the mom's perspective, it's doubly cruel, because we have watched this whole movie where, the daughter is and the daughter's legitimately frustrated. Her parents are very controlling. They're very restrictive of her behavior and her social life, and just disapproving in general. But they're butting heads constantly. And finally, the daughter's like, hey, I'm going to do something nice for you.
Yeah.
And it literally begins with them having a meal together, where they go out and they have, and the mom's just, they're having like tea and I think cake or something like that. And the mom's just like, oh, I should watch my weight. And Melanie Linsky says like, no, Mom, take the last piece. You deserve it. She's just like, oh, okay, I guess I will. And it's weird because the niceness that sort of precedes the violent act makes the violence not just physical but emotional, because there's this new level of betrayal that happens there where when the mom turns around and sees her daughter, it's not just like, oh my God, you hit me, you're trying to kill me, but it's also like, you lied to me. And in some ways that's the deeper.
And also, we as the audience know it's coming. Because
Yeah.
we know that they've planned it.
Mm-hmm.
And so like when she does push the cake, it's almost like, don't take the cake. Like,
Yeah,
don't do
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Don't
yeah.
do it, like what's about to come. And it is just so sad. And you're kind of hoping at every moment they're going to decide not to do it. But
Yeah.
because it's true crime,
Yeah.
we know what. That's also a weird thing with, because you and I have talked a little bit about the differentiation between crime and true crime. But like with true crime, you know how it's going to end because it really happened. There's very few movies that they change. Like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, like Quentin takes liberties and he changes the ending of a historic event. But there's very few true crime movies that do that. Like with Woman of the Hour, I can look up the Rodney Alcala story and I can see like how it ends and like the true parts of it are really cool. And, well, cool is kind of a weird word to use, but it's fascinating.
Well, it's interesting because and that was one of the tricky things about Woman of the Hour because, how, you can see like footage on YouTube of like Rodney on the dating game and how we as modern audiences read that event is radically different from how audiences in 1978, because if you're in 1978 you're going like, oh, it's another episode of this, it's kind of a corny show, like, oh, he's one more bachelor out of 3 bachelors, like there's nothing unusual about this. But just simply by virtue of the fact that I'm watching it on YouTube and not on TV, the fact that it's usually in the subject heading is Rodney Alcala serial killer, it means that the footage is this like
creepy footage.
It's very creepy. And so that was one of the things that we always tried to really overcome, where it's just like, how do you, because audiences know what he really is going into it, you want to make sure that they don't feel like the protagonist is dumb for falling
for it.
Yeah, because it's just like,
because in real life she wasn't dumb because she figured it out before anyone else did.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's a really tricky line to walk.
For sure. What's another movie on your list?
Can You Ever Forgive Me? Okay.
So Can You Ever Forgive Me? This is the movie with Melissa McCarthy.
Yes. Yeah, where she plays a struggling biographer who writes about like celebrities of the past, old intellectual. I'm trying to remember who she's writing about. I think she's writing about Dorothy Parker in the movie. And she just can't sell her book. And so eventually she resorts to forging letters between famous people as a way of making a living. And it is just excruciatingly uncomfortable to watch. It's like funny. It's like cringe funny. But it's, I'm probably going to be repeating myself a lot on this because all my favorite movies are like, they're sad and they're beautiful and they're touching and they're uncomfortable. And those are the qualities that I like in these movies.
Uncomfortable. Like you like to feel uncomfortable when you watch a movie.
Yeah, I think so. It's funny. It's like, I really, really love it in movies and I really hate it in real life. Like there is nothing worse than a bad wedding speech to me where I just want to die. But a bad wedding speech in a movie, love it. It's great,
Is it because there's safety? Like that it's not real, or like that you're not actually there participating in it? Like
no, I think it's the reason that I like any art, which is that it reflects something true, and it's just like in
great way to put it.
Like it's it's not fun to have your heart broken, but it's fun to watch a movie about someone having their heart broken because you're just like, oh, I've been there.
Yeah,
and
I can relate to that. I'm not alone.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and maybe it's just because I'm it's very easily to make me uncomfortable in situations it's a feeling I'm very in touch with.
I find it fascinating when movies cast comedians in these kinds of roles
Oh.
because it's kind of like going against typecasting in a way, but I feel like they should do this more often.
Yep.
Like when a comedian takes a very serious role.
Oh, yeah.
And even though this movie does have like a little, I'm gonna use like air quotes again, a little bit of humor in it.
Yeah.
It is a serious role, and I like it. Like the movie It, like the TV movie, how they took all the comedians and they put them into the horror movie to kind of make you think that it was gonna be fine, and it's all these familiar faces, and you're like shocked that it's so scary.
Yeah.
I love when movies do this, and it subverts your expectations.
Oh, same. I mean, I think Melissa McCarthy in this gives one of the best performances of the last decade.
It was kind of overlooked, I feel.
It was, and I don't know how. It is just amazing. She gives such a soulful and vulnerable and nimble performance. There's this the relationship I love the most in it is between her and this woman that owns a bookstore, and she keeps selling her these fake letters, and they develop a relationship. It's weird. I was not thinking I had all these queer stories in here, but this is another queer story.
That's so interesting,
God,
though.
Monster.
Well, you know
Can
what,
you ever
though?
forgive
It
me?
might
Heavenly...
also be because maybe the true crime stories that are really interesting. I know we're going to talk about Dog Day after
Yeah.
eventually, but they kind of all are queer stories all of a sudden that are.
Well, there's another through line in all of these, which is I think the bad true crime stories are sensationalist and they're about the events.
Yes.
And I think the good true crime stories are about feelings.
And the people, actually.
And the people. Yeah. It's about the feelings. It's about, it's, what is it? There's this great Faulkner line where he said, all great dramas about one thing, and that's the heart in conflict with itself.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to watch, and that's what I want to make. But sometimes you watch a movie and it's like, oh, it's not about the heart in conflict with itself. It's about a serial killer.
And it beats you over the head with it.
Yeah, exactly. But can you ever forgive me? There's all these scenes where she loves this woman, and yet she's also lying to her, and she's also using her, and she's selling letters to her that she knows are forges.
It's also the betrayal.
Yes,
we talked about that with Heavenly Creatures.
Yeah,
there's this betrayal because like you fall in love with someone, or you love someone, or you are lying to someone, and it's just like that's almost the worst part of it all.
Yeah.
Like it's almost worse than the act itself.
Well, in some ways, seeing movies about serial killers can be really easy to watch because it's just like, well, I'm not a serial killer, so I'm not that bad, and it puts the audience in a very comfortable position. And yet, and while we haven't all forged letters and sold it for money,
I hope not. I hope neither of us have done that in this room.
I wish I had that skill, to be honest, but but no, the bad behavior that she exhibits in this movie it's kind of more earthbound, and it's quieter, and it's more familiar, and it comes from a very empathetic place where it's just like, she's got a sick cat and she's trying to, keep it alive. Like that, in some ways, that is her motivation in the movie.
Yeah.
And the fact that she doesn't have like, a child who's dying in the hospital, like makes it both smaller and bigger at the same time. It's smaller because, pets die, and so the stakes are smaller, and yet at the same time it's more real. The second you have a child that's on life support, I'm sorry, but like as a viewer, I'm kind of like, oh yeah, it's a movie.
Yeah.
And then the filmmaker really has to overcome the hurdle of having reminded me, oh, I'm watching a movie with life and death stakes involving a child, in order to buy into the stakes at all.
Yeah, because the stakes are so high that it almost becomes unrelatable.
Yeah.
Well, we've all had a pet.
Yeah.
That we love and cherish.
Yeah, I think more the thing is that it's used as a device. I think that's the thing. And because it's kind of so ubiquitous, it makes us distrust it, Like it's just, whenever you see one of those cliches in a movie, where someone, two people are arguing over something, I need this, you need that. And then there's a pause and one character says, please. And the other person just goes for it. I don't know what it is about that please, that like I see it all the time.
Yeah.
That seems to end all conversations. I'm just like, oh, if only it were like that in the real life.
We should make it like that in real life.
Yeah. Just don't say please until you mean it, and then you get what you want.
Exactly. So, okay, I know you have a few others on there, and I mentioned Dog Day Afternoon.
Okay.
And I love Dog Day Afternoon. And I'm not going to say it's a sapphic story because it's not, but Chris Sarandon.
Yeah, but well, it's a queer story.
It's a queer story.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a queer story. I mean, yeah, like you were saying before, it's a heist gone wrong movie, which
Yeah.
I adore. And it's it's one of these movies that just has so many great moments in it.
Well, I think also, like, when we kind of talked a little bit before, we were talking about how a lot of people associate true crime specifically with serial killers.
Yeah.
And here is an example, and also the Melissa McCarthy movie is an example of two true crime movies that are not serial killers. They or not murders even. They're just, it's a forgery and it's a robbery.
Yeah. And and it's a failed robbery, it's and so
As most robberies tend to be.
I mean,
I think the only movie that's like a robbery gone right, I'm going to put that in quotes also, is Thomas Crown Affair.
Yeah.
Maybe? Like, that's maybe the only one that's gone right?
Yeah,
that I
no,
can think of?
I guess
Like
they all kind of have to end.
Ocean's 11, does that go right or wrong? Or
Yeah,
Ocean's
no,
8
they
or
get away
whatever?
with it. Yeah, they get away with it in that.
Yeah. It's not as satisfying to me when they get away with it for some reason.
It is.
I want their comeuppance. I want the money and the killing to like go all over the tarmac and like blow around.
Yeah, I can't remember. Somebody once said there are certain things that audience expect out of movies, and they love it when you don't give it to them.
Yeah.
And I think, we want the comeuppance, and yet every so often when the person gets away with the thing, it feels deliciously bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's God, I should have looked it up. But the character that plays Sal in
that
it,
plays Sal, yeah.
I mean, Al Pacino's great in it. Everyone knows Al Pacino is great in it. He's amazing. But the guy that plays Sal, I just think is so remarkable, and he has so many wonderful lines in it. The moment towards the end of the movie when they're about to like get on the plane and fly off, and Al Pacino says, "Who do you want to call? Like, you can call anyone because you're not going to be able to say hi to them ever again. We're going to be on the run."
John Cazale.
John Cazale. Who do you want to call? And he's just like, I don't know. I don't have anyone. And it's just so fucking sad. And
when he says where he wants to go.
Yeah. Where do you want to go? Where do you want to go? And he's just like, what country do you want to go? That's the important thing. And he goes, Wyoming. It's just like, Wyoming's not a country, man. Like,
And also, of all states even to pick, you pick Wyoming, and it tells you so much.
Well, it's funny because it makes you realize he doesn't actually know where Wyoming is. Like,
Yeah.
he's
totally right about that.
He's literally just picking the name of a place that he can think of, and so he's not well educated. He's in some ways not very bright, but he's very lonely. He doesn't have a lot of people in his life, and he's really insecure. And so you watch it, and your heart just sort of goes out to him. And I love these. It like, there obviously are movies on this list where there's like a clear bad guy, but I also love movies where there kind of just isn't, where there's people who make mistakes and who fuck up and do things that are sometimes unforgivable. But where people are sort of trying their best, like in Dog Day Afternoon, this is Al Pacino. He's robbing a bank to get his trans feminine partner a sex change operation.
God, and Chris Sarandon is so good in that.
Yeah.
And I love how just the movie does not mistreat Chris Sarandon's character in the slightest. Like, you put it really well. You were like, the cops are laughing at her, but the movie isn't.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's the most important thing, because the movie isn't, the audience isn't. And Chris won the Academy Award, was nominated, I think. For that.
I don't remember which it was,
I can't remember if he won, but
yeah.
that role is just, he's been in so freaking much. But that role is one of my favorite of his, for sure.
And it's such a great example. They always say there's no small parts, just small actors. And it's just like, my God, what he does because he's only on screen for maybe 5 minutes.
And it's also like shocking when it's revealed that that's what's going on in the movie. Like, this is what this is all about, is this?
Because again, it's like Melissa McCarthy doing all this for her cat, which is not to compare a person to a cat, but it's like he's doing this,
for something that's so important to him.
Yeah, it's
personally.
There's an action, there's a love story at the center of it all, and there's also just something so wonderful about when Al Pacino calls Chris Sarandon and tells him, like, I'm here at the bank robbing the bank. He's just like, you're an idiot. What are you doing? Why would you do this? You're always doing this stuff. And it turns into this lover's spat, where it's just like suddenly it becomes so real and so grounded. And it's just like, these are just two people doing the best they can. And I adore it so much.
That's a movie that everyone should see if they haven't.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's perfect. I mean, it's weird because like Sidney Lumet is one of those directors where it's just like, you're not allowed to have this many masterpieces. Like,
it's
where
a little bit like, it's like how John McTiernan is like so good at writing action. I'm like,
yeah.
Come on. Okay. What's going on over there? Like,
yeah.
How'd you get that special juice?
Yeah. And it's just like, and it's just my favorite. Then I'll jump into the last one, Zodiac.
Yeah.
This is the thing that, so when Anna first signed on to direct the movie, I went over to her house and I'm just like, okay, how do you see this? Because, each director is going to bring their own take, their own
and
vibe.
every writer also, you have your own vibe and she's going to have her own also. It's like she's going to add to the pot.
Yeah, exactly. And, she's just like, I want this to feel like Zodiac meets No Country for Old Men, which is just music to my ears. They're too, it's funny. No Country I saw in theaters when it came out 6 times, which is
oh my gosh,
obsessive.
really?
It's too many times. It wasn't until the 3rd time I realized there's no score like that, and so there was always something new to learn.
That's amazing though that I didn't even realize that, I don't think,
there's
until you
like
just said it.
There's like 10 seconds of music at one point in the movie and it's just a drone. It's not even really music.
They could sell that soundtrack album.
But Zodiac has this like weird little place in my heart because it's one of only 2 movies where I watched it all the way through. Then second I finished it, started it at the beginning and watched it again.
What's the other one?
When Harry Met Sally.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, they're just, oh my God, they're both so wonderful in very different ways. Yeah, the thing I love about Zodiac is, I mean, it's kind of encapsulated by the ending of the movie where, you have this detective and this cartoonist and this journalist, and they've all been working to figure out who the Zodiac is for, the whole duration of the movie. And the audience thinks they know because they think they know. And the movie, and again, we've discussed spoilers are okay. The FBI goes to, meets one of the earliest victims at the airport and lays out a bunch of mugshots and says like, all right, which person stabbed you or which person shot you? And he kind of looks over the pictures and then he points to one and he said, I think it's that guy. And the FBI agent says, how sure are you on a scale of 1 to 10? And the victim says 8. And I love, love, love the fact that the movie carved out room for doubt because it's like most of these cases, these cold cases that are decades old, we don't know for sure. And the fact that the movie is willing to wrestle with that and let the audience sit in that place of not knowing is just so emotionally and intellectually honest. I just love it. And the whole movie feels that way to me.
That's all the time that we have for today. But Ian, is there any final thought that you'd like to share with the audience?
I guess go see Woman of the Hour when it comes out. Yeah. It drops on Netflix on October 18th. So it's getting a limited theatrical release on the 11th. It's premiering on Netflix on the 18th.
Amazing. Oh, I'm excited that's going to be in theaters actually too.
Me too. Yeah, I was very surprised.
That's amazing.
But
that's
pleasantly
like,
so.
Woo, I love that. Thank you to my guest, Ian McDonald, for coming onto the show. Make sure to check out Woman of the Hour streaming on Netflix starting on October 18th. And if it's playing in a theater near you on the 11th,
yes,
I hope you guys get to go see it because it was really a blast. And I love true crime. And so it was really fun to see on the big screen. And also the acting in it is really good. I love the guy that plays Rodney Alcala.
Daniel Zavato.
Yeah, he walks that line of like creepy and handsome. Like I think he does a really good job with that.
It was funny. So my wife and I have a cameo in the movie at the very end. We're just 2 people in the diner, and while she was being made up in the trailer, he was sitting beside her also being made up. And I guess Daniel told her, he's just like, yeah, my wife read the script before I did. And she's just like, honey, you would be perfect for this role. And he's just like, I don't know how to take that. But he's a very sweet, charming guy. So yeah.
I'm Gala Avery, and this has been The Gala Show. The Gala Show is brought to you by Avery.com. This episode was executive produced by Roger Avery and produced by Gala Avery. Music composed by Andy Milburn. As always, I'm your host, Gala Avery. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. Despite me sharing the same last name with this charity, I don't have any affiliation with it, besides the fact the issue is very near and dear to my heart. Did you know that in the United States, 2.7 million children currently have a parent in prison, and it's estimated that 10 million children have experienced parental incarceration at some point in their lives? I was one of these kids, and as an adult, I am really grateful to be able to give back to Project Avery. Their mission is to build leadership from within by supporting community through programs such as mentoring and outdoor education, and also to remove the stigma surrounding having a parent that's incarcerated. You don't have to feel alone. If you know a kid who could use these resources or would like to donate money or time to the charity, please go to Project Avery, that's AVARY.org, to check out what this amazing charity is all about. Again, that's projectavery.org. Thank you guys from the bottom of my heart.